In the summer of 1997, a house in Oakland, California, caught fire in the middle of the night. Two sisters were known to live in the house, but that night, first responders found only one of them, badly burned, but alive. She told investigators that her name was Stevie Orman. She was shaken, furious, and adamant about one thing. Someone had tried to kill her. From her hospital bed, she told police and reporters that drug dealers had targeted her home in retaliation for her outspoken stance against crime in the neighborhood. It was a story that made headlines, one that painted her as a survivor, even a kind of local hero. But as investigators began to look more closely, some details didn't sit right. Questions surfaced, timelines blurred, and one unsettling issue refused to go away. Where was the other sister who lived in the house? Hello, I'm Ellie Calderwin. Sarah Mitchell and her older sister, Stevie Orman, grew up in California in the same family home and ultimately ended up living together in Oakland in the 1990s. At the time of the fire, Stevie was 52, while Sarah was 47. Despite their shared upbringing, the two sisters' adult lives had diverged in noticeable ways since their childhood. Stevie Orman was widely described by those who knew her as the more organized and functional of the two. She handled paperwork, bills, and the day-to-day responsibilities connected to the home they shared, which, by the way, Stevie owned. She maintained a relatively steady working life, holding clerical and service-oriented jobs over the years. She was practical, someone who understood systems, documents, and how to navigate them. Stevie had also established herself publicly as an anti-drug activist. She operated a small community organization focused on speaking out against narcotics activity in the neighborhood. Although it was not a large or lucrative enterprise, it gave Stevie something important: visibility. Her name was known. She attended meetings, spoke openly, and presented herself as someone unafraid to confront drug crime. That public identity mattered. It shaped how others saw her, and later, how authorities initially interpreted what happened at the house. Sarah, on the other hand, struggled to find her feet and maintain the same stability. Her work history was irregular, with periods of employment mixed with financial instability. She was a single mother raising her daughter in the home she shared with Stevie. She did not have the same reputation for consistency or administrative control as her sister, and she often relied on Stevie, not just for housing, but for structure. With both women under the same roof, the imbalance in their abilities and access to resources soon became clear. Stevie was the sister with public standing, organizational authority, and control over their home and all the paperwork. Sarah lived alongside that reality, increasingly dependent on access to what Stevie owned and managed. As the years went by, the the relationship between the two sisters began to fall apart. Stevie, realizing her sister was heavily dependent on her without contributing much, decided it was time to lay down the law. She wanted Sarah to get a steady job and move out. Sarah did not argue. On July 1st, 1997, first responders arrived at the sisters' home in response to reports of a fire. It appeared the home had been petrol bombed. Inside, the police found a woman who had been badly burnt and in pain. She told the police that the fire was not an accident. It was an attack. She said the house had been deliberately set ablaze by drug dealers, angered by her activism in the neighborhood. She told them her name was Stevie Allman. From her hospital bed, Stevie described herself as a target, someone who had spoken out too loudly, too often, against very dangerous people. The police were familiar with Stevie's work. After all, she had spent years presenting herself as someone willing to confront narcotics activity head-on. She attended community meetings, contacted authorities, and made her opposition to drugs part of her public identity. So when she said, "This happened because of what I do," they listened. The case was defined as an act of retaliation. News outlets echoed the idea. Community donations poured in. Some reports suggest that a total of $4,700 was donated to Stevie while she was in hospital. To everyone, what had happened was deeply unsettling. An activist had been punished for taking a stand. In the days following the fire, no one publicly questioned whether the woman in the hospital bed was telling the truth. There was no reason to. But as detectives began to investigate how and why anyone would attack Stevie Allman's home, one detail emerged from the background. The house was shared, and no one knew or could explain what had happened to the other sister. At first, the questions around Sarah's whereabouts did not raise any alarms. Being a 47-year-old woman, she could have taken a trip to visit friends or family, or to even see her daughter. But as time passed, the police struggled to find Sarah and pin down her whereabouts. And that led to investigators asking more questions. Was Sarah in the house that night with Stevie? When were the sisters last seen, and by whom? Who stood to gain from attacking the home? But the investigators were unprepared for the biggest question that would soon emerge. Sarah Mitchell's young daughter was brought to the hospital to her mother, who was in the hospital, recovering from burns. Instead of relief or recognition, the child was confused. She quietly told adults that the woman in the bed did not seem like her mother. She noted differences in voice, mannerisms, and behavior. Small things an adult might dismiss, but that a child who knows her mother intimately would notice immediately. To many who visited Sarah in the hospital, her daughter's doubts were easy to overlook amid the chaos and sympathy surrounding the alleged attack. After all, the woman in the hospital bed was badly burnt, and it was possible that Sarah's daughter was confused by grief, seeing her mother in such a state. But for the investigators, it was a call to redirect their attention. They began to question not just the story of the fire, but the identity of the survivor. Nearly 2 weeks after the fire, investigators returned to the burnt house to search for clues. This time, they weren't looking for signs of arson. They were looking for a person who had not been accounted for: Sarah Mitchell. As detectives moved through the damaged interior, something caught their attention: a large freezer still inside the home. It didn't belong in a burned, abandoned space, and it appeared to have been deliberately sealed shut with duct tape. When investigators opened it, they made a discovery that instantly reframed the entire case. Inside the freezer were the remains of a woman they could not recognize. Was this Stevie Allman or Sarah Mitchell? Investigators returned to the hospital to question the woman they no longer believed was Stevie. They asked pointed questions, requested more details about the fire, and eventually compared fingerprints. You see, back in 1971, Sarah Mitchell, Stevie Allman's sister, had been arrested for prostitution. So the police had her fingerprints on file. It was the move that cracked the case open. The woman in the hospital bed pleadingly admitted she was Sarah Mitchell, not Stevie Allman. Investigators now believed they knew what had happened. The remains they found in the freezer belonged to Stevie Allman, the woman everyone believed had survived the fire. The story of a targeted activist collapsed, replaced by a far darker reality. The wrong sister had been in the hospital, and the fire had simply been a means to hide the truth. On July 24th, 1997, Sarah Mitchell was arrested for killing her sister and assuming her identity afterward. At first, people close to the case wondered how Sarah could have gotten so angry at the sister who housed and fed her, to the point of committing murder. But as investigators pieced the case together, a motive began to emerge that had little to do with anger and everything to do with control. Stevie Allman held the legal and practical power in the household. Her name was tied to the house, to official records, and to financial access that came with ownership and recognized identity. Sarah Mitchell, by contrast, was financially unstable and responsible for raising a young child, relying heavily on her sister for housing and support. Prosecutors argued that by eliminating Stevie and assuming her identity, Sarah could step into that authority, sign documents, control property, receive payments, and delay discovery long enough to benefit. She would not have to move out like Stevie demanded. She would have everything she craved. It was not a crime driven by impulse, investigators said, but by calculation. A belief that identity itself could be taken, worn, and used as a means of survival. Sarah was held without bail, and the case moved into the court system in Alameda County. From the outside, the story sounded almost unbelievable, because identity theft is usually a financial crime. Paperwork, fraud, a scheme. But here, investigators argued it was something worse: identity theft as the motive, and murder as the method. Sarah Mitchell was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, without parole, for the murder of her sister, Stevie Allman, after the jury voted against the death penalty, in response to pleas from family members. People remember this case for a reason, because it's not only about violence. It's about impersonation. The idea that someone could erase you, then walk through the world wearing your name. Most of us think identity theft happens from a distance. A hacked account, a stolen card, a stranger online. But in this story, the alleged theft came from someone with access. Someone inside the home. Inside the family. Inside a trusted structure. This case endures because it isn't just about murder. It's about proximity, shared walls, shared history, shared identity. Stevie Orman wasn't killed by someone who didn't know her. She was erased by someone who knew her completely. And the fire that drew attention to the house didn't reveal the truth right away. It delayed it until it couldn't anymore. Thank you for listening. I am Ellie Calderwin, and this was Eerie Stories.